When billionaire heir Jack Harrington proposes a fake marriage to escape his father's arranged engagement, he thinks he's found the perfect solution. Katherine Chen, a desperate woman drowning in medical bills for her sick daughter, seems like the ideal partner for his 6-month charade, but neither of them realizes they're walking into a deadly game of secrets, lies, and long-buried crimes. Asterisk story time. Fam, and this one is dripping with romance, secrets, and one unforgettable twist. Let's jump straight into it. Asterisk, the champagne flute shattered against the marble floor, crystal fragments catching the light from the chandeliers above. Jack Harrington stood frozen in the doorway of the penthouse ballroom, watching his carefully orchestrated life crumble along with the glass. You will marry Helena Roswell, and that's final. His father's voice cut through the din of Manhattan's elite, each word a nail in the coffin of Jack's autonomy. Gregory Harrington commanded the room with the authority of a man who had never heard the word no, his silver hair gleaming under the golden light as he gestured toward the statuesque blonde at his side. Helena smiled, the expression sharp enough to cut glass. Don't look so devastated, darling. I'm quite the catch. Jack's jaw tightened. At 32, he had built an empire within an empire, expanding Harrington Enterprises into territories his father had only dreamed of. But in this moment, surrounded by the suffocating opulence of old money and older expectations, he felt like nothing more than a chess piece being moved across a board he'd never been allowed to see. The weight of 300 guests pressed against his consciousness, their conversations a symphony of mergers and acquisitions, stock prices, and social climbing. The air tasted of expensive perfume and barely concealed ambition, thick enough to choke on. I need air, he muttered, pushing through the crowd without another glance at his father's thunderous expression. The October night bit at his skin as he stepped onto the terrace, 40 stories above the city that never slept. Below, Manhattan pulsed with life, millions of people living and breathing and choosing their own destinies. The irony wasn't lost on him. His phone buzzed. A text from his assistant about the quarterly reports, then another about the Beijing expansion, and another about the Senate hearing next week. Each notification a reminder of the life he'd built, the life that would be handed over to Helena Roswell, like a wedding gift wrapped in legal documents. Jack loosened his tie, the silk suddenly feeling like a noose. In 6 hours, the engagement announcement would go live. The contracts had already been drawn up, his signature a foregone conclusion in his father's mind. But as he stared out at the sprawling city below, a dangerous thought took root. What if it wasn't? Wow. 2 hours later, Jack found himself in a part of Brooklyn he'd never seen before. His Aston Martin incongruous among the weathered brownstones and chain-link fences. He couldn't explain what had driven him here, only that he'd needed to escape the gilded cage of his world, if only for a few hours. The woman on the hospital steps looked like she was carrying the weight of the universe on her shoulders. Her auburn hair caught the harsh fluorescent light spilling from the emergency room entrance, and her hands shook as she clutched a stack of papers that looked thick enough to bury her. Something in her posture, the way she held herself together, despite clearly falling apart, made him pull over. "Rough night?" he asked, approaching with the careful movements of someone who understood that broken things required gentle handling. She looked up, and Jack felt something shift in his chest. Her eyes were the color of forest shadows, deep and haunted and beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with makeup or designer clothes. There was intelligence there, and pain, and a fierce determination that reminded him of himself before the world had tried to break him into acceptable pieces. You could say that. Her voice was hoarse, probably from crying, though her cheeks were dry now. She clutched the papers tighter. "Sorry, I don't mean to take up space. It's just you're not taking up anything." Jack sat beside her on the concrete steps, ignoring the way his $1,000 suit protested against the rough surface. Medical bills. She nodded, not bothering to hide them now. The top page bore the letterhead of Mount Sinai Children's Hospital, and the number at the bottom made Jack's stomach clench. He'd spent more on art pieces, but he understood the difference between having money and needing it. "My daughter," she said quietly. "Leukemia. The treatments are working, but the insurance." She She trailed off, shaking her head. What's your name? Katherine. Katherine Chen. She studied his face in the harsh light. You're not from around here. Not. Jack found himself speaking with more honesty than he'd used all evening. I'm running away from something. It's funny. I can't run away from mine. They sat in silence for a moment, two strangers bound by the strange intimacy of shared desperation. Jack watched her profile, noting the determined set of her jaw. The way she refused to let her shoulders slump despite the crushing weight she carried. What if I told you there might be a way, he said finally. Katherine turned to face him fully, suspicion flickering across her features. A way to what? To solve both our problems. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Mister, I don't know what kind of problems a guy in a suit like that could have, but I guarantee they're nothing like mine. My father wants me to marry a woman I've never loved to secure a business deal worth $500 million. In 6 months, I'll lose control of everything I've built, unless I find another way. The words came out in a rush, surprising him with their honesty. You need money. I need freedom. There might be a solution that gives us both what we need. Katherine's eyes narrowed. What kind of solution? Jack met her gaze, seeing the exact moment she understood what he was suggesting. The silence stretched. Between them, heavy with possibility and terror. You're insane, she whispered. Probably. Jack stood pulling a business card from his pocket. His fingers brushed hers as he placed it in her palm, and he felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with the contract marriage he was proposing. But desperate times call for desperate measures. As he walked back to his car, Jack didn't look back. He couldn't afford to see the hope or fear in Katherine Chen's eyes. Couldn't let himself wonder if he was saving her or destroying them both. Behind him, Katherine stared at the card in her trembling hands. Her daughter's future hanging in the balance of a decision that would change everything. Katherine stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of Jack's office, a reflection ghost-like against the Manhattan skyline. 3 days had passed since their encounter on the hospital steps. 3 days of sleepless nights and impossible calculations. The medical bills hadn't stopped coming. And neither had the phone calls from debt collectors whose voices grew sharper with each passing hour. You look like you haven't slept, Jack observed from behind his mahogany desk, his tone carrying an unexpected note of concern. I haven't. Katherine turned to face him, her forest green eyes rimmed with exhaustion, but blazing with determination. I need to know this isn't some elaborate joke. Rich men don't typically rescue strangers from hospital steps. Jack leaned back in his leather chair, studying her with the same intensity he reserved for hostile takeovers. She wore the same clothes from 3 nights ago, but she held herself with a dignity that designer gowns couldn't manufacture. Rich men also don't typically propose marriage to strangers. Yet here we are. The contract lay between them on the desk, thick as a novel, and twice as intimidating. Katherine had read it cover to cover twice, searching for the trap she knew had to be hidden in the legal jargon. But the terms were exactly as Jack had promised. 6 months of marriage, full medical coverage for Lily, a settlement that would ensure Katherine never had to choose between her daughter's life and financial ruin again. The press conference is tomorrow, Jack continued, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of what they were discussing. Once we announce the engagement, there's no going back. My father will be furious, but he can't force me to marry Helena if I'm already committed elsewhere. And after 6 months, clean divorce. Irreconcilable differences. You disappear with more money than you could spend in a lifetime, and I get to keep my company. Jack's fingers drummed against the desk, the only sign of his inner turmoil. Simple. Katherine almost laughed at the word simple. Nothing about this was simple. She would have to lie to everyone she cared about, live in a world where she didn't belong, pretend to love a man who saw her as nothing more than a convenient solution to an inconvenient problem. But then she thought of Lily in that hospital bed, so small and brave, asking why the nice doctors couldn't make the pain go away anymore. I'll need to see her every day, Katherine said finally. Hospital visits, dinner, bedtime stories. Non-negotiable, of course. Jack's expression softened almost imperceptibly. We'll arrange for the best private care, She'll have everything she needs. Katherine picked up the gold pen he'd placed beside the contract, its weight solid and real in her trembling fingers. She thought of her parents, who had died believing she would make something of herself, would never live to see her struggle to keep their granddaughter alive. They would understand. They had to. Her signature flowed across the paper in careful script, each letter a small betrayal of the life she'd planned and a desperate gamble on one she'd never imagined. Done. She set the pen down with more force than necessary, the click echoing in the vast office. Jack signed his own name with practiced efficiency, but Katherine caught the slight hesitation before he formed the final letter. When he looked up, something had changed in his expression, as though the reality of their arrangement had finally hit him. "There's something else you should know," he said, his voice carrying a weight that made Katherine's stomach drop. "My father isn't the type of man who accepts defeat gracefully. When he finds out about this, he'll try to destroy you.
Everything.
About your life will be scrutinized, dissected, used against you if possible." The warning should have terrified her. Instead, Katherine felt a strange calm settle over her shoulders. "Let him try. I've already lost everything that mattered once. I won't let it happen again." Jack stood, moving to the window where the city sprawled before them like a circuit board of dreams and ambitions. "The wedding is in 2 weeks. We'll need to make it convincing." How convincing? He turned back to her, and for a moment Katherine saw past the corporate armor to the man underneath. He looked young suddenly, vulnerable in a way that made her chest tight. "Convincing enough that when my father tries to tear us apart, he fails." The prenup consultation the next morning took place in a conference room that could have housed a small village. Katherine sat beside Jack at a table that stretched longer than her entire apartment, listening to lawyers discuss her future as though she were a stock option being evaluated. Mrs. Chen will, of course, sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, the lead attorney was saying, his voice as dry as old paper. "Any breach of confidentiality regarding Mr. Harrington's personal or business affairs will result in immediate forfeiture of all financial arrangements." Katherine's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "And what about his confidentiality regarding my affairs?" The room fell silent. Jack's eyebrows rose slightly, the first genuine expression of surprise she'd seen from him. "I beg your pardon?" the attorney asked. "The contract protects his secrets," Katherine continued, her voice steady despite the sea of hostile stares. "What protects mine?" Jack leaned forward, his gaze locked on hers with newfound interest. "What kind of protection do you need?" Katherine thought of the foster homes, the social workers, the careful lies she'd told to keep Lily safe from a system that would have separated them. She thought of her real last name, buried along with her parents in a cemetery she could longer afford to visit. "The same kind you do," she said finally. Something shifted in Jack's expression, a recognition that perhaps they were more alike than either had realized. He turned to his attorney with the kind of authority that brooked no argument. "Draw up reciprocal confidentiality clauses. Applies to her, applies to me. So that's highly irregular. Do it." As the lawyers scurried to make the changes, Jack leaned closer to Katherine, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "What aren't you telling me, Katherine Chen?" She met his gaze without flinching, though her pulse hammered against her throat. "What aren't you telling me, Jack Harrington?" The air between them crackled with unspoken truths and unasked questions. Katherine realized with a start that she wasn't just entering into a business arrangement. She was stepping into a game where the rules kept changing, and the stakes were higher than either of them fully understood. "Mr. Harrington?" His assistant's voice cut through the tension. "Your father is here. He's asking to see you immediately." Jack's face went pale, then hard as stone. Through the conference room's glass walls, Katherine could see Gregory Harrington, striding down the hallway like an approaching storm, his expression murderous. "He knows," Jack said quietly. Katherine's blood turned to ice. "How? It doesn't matter." Jack stood, his body coiled with tension. "The question is, what we do about it." Gregory Harrington burst through the conference room doors without knocking, his fury a tangible force that seemed to suck the oxygen from the room. His cold blue eyes swept over Katherine with the kind of dismissive assessment usually reserved for insects. What the hell do you think you're doing? He snarled at Jack, ignoring everyone else in the room, as though they were furniture. As Jack's posture shifted, his shoulders squaring as he faced down the man who had controlled every aspect of his life for 3 decades. I'm getting married, Father. I thought you'd be pleased. To some nobody from Brooklyn? Gregory's voice dripped. With contempt? I've already had her investigated, Jack. Katherine Chen, 28 waitress. Guardian to a sick child she can't afford to treat. Did you really think you could pull this pathetic stunt without consequences? Katherine felt the words hit. Her like physical blows, each one designed to remind her of her place in their world. But instead of shrinking, she found herself standing straighter, her chin lifting in defiance. The pathetic stunt, she said, her voice cutting through Gregory's tirade like a blade, is assuming you can buy and sell people like stock options? Gregory's attention snapped to her with laser focus, his expression shifting from dismissive to genuinely dangerous. You have no idea what you're interfering with, little girl. Then enlighten me. The silence that followed was deafening. Katherine could feel Jack's tension radiating beside her, could see the war playing out across his features as he watched his father size up. The woman who had just declared herself an enemy of the Harrington dynasty. Gregory smiled, and Katherine's blood ran cold. It was the smile of a predator who had just decided how to devour its prey. Very well, he said softly. Let me show you exactly what you've gotten yourself into. The photograph landed on the conference table with the soft whisper of expensive paper against mahogany. Katherine's breath caught in her throat as she stared down at an image she hadn't seen in 15 years. A young girl with auburn hair and determined eyes stood beside a woman whose face had been carefully blurred out. Katherine Liu, Gregory said, his voice silk over steel. Age 13. Last known addressed, a foster home in Queens, before you disappeared into the system like smoke. Jack's head snapped toward Katherine, confusion and something that might have been betrayal flickering across his features. Katherine's hands remained steady as she reached for the photograph, though her world tilted on its axis. Where? Did you get this? I have resources you can't imagine, my dear. Gregory's smile was razor sharp. The question is, what else are you hiding? Because if you think you can blackmail my family with whatever secrets you're carrying, you're more naive than I thought. The truth sat heavy on Katherine's tongue. 15 years of carefully constructed lies, threatening to crumble in an instant. She thought of Lily, asleep in her hospital bed, unaware that the foundation of their life together was built on deception and forged documents. My parents were murdered, she said quietly, her voice cutting through the tension like broken glass. Not in a car accident, murdered. By the men who wanted to silence the story my mother was investigating. Jack's intake of breath was sharp enough to slice. What story? Katherine looked directly at Gregory, watching his face for any flicker of recognition. She was a journalist, investigating money laundering through international shipping contracts. The kind of contracts that might involve companies like Harrington Enterprises. The color drained from Gregory's face so quickly that Katherine knew she'd hit her target. But instead of the satisfaction she'd expected, she felt only a hollow ache. The truth was finally free, but it tasted like ashes. You're lying, Gregory, whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Katherine stood, her movements deliberate and controlled. Julia Liu, investigative journalist for the New York Herald. Ring any bells, Mr. Harrington? Jack's chair scraped against the floor. As he shot to his feet, that's impossible. The Herald investigation was 15 years ago. They never published anything because the journalist died in an accident. No accident. Katherine's voice was steady now, strengthened by years of buried truth finally seeing. Daylight, 3 men broke into our apartment, made it look like a gas leak. I survived because I was hiding in the closet, too scared to come out even when I heard my mother screaming. The room had gone deathly quiet. Even the lawyers had stopped. Their rustling papers, sensing that they were witnessing something far more dangerous than a simple contract negotiation. Gregory's hands were shaking now, his carefully maintained composure cracking like ice in spring. Even if what you're saying is true, you can't prove anything. It was 15 years ago. I have everything. Katherine's smile was sharp enough. To draw blood. My mother was paranoid about backing up her work. Every document, every recording, every photograph. I've been waiting 15 years for the right moment to use them. Jack's face had gone ashen. Katherine, what are you saying? She turned to him, and for a moment, the mask slipped. He saw the scared 13-year-old girl who had watched her world burn, who had spent half her life planning revenge against the men who had destroyed her family. I'm saying that your marriage proposal came at a very convenient time, she said softly. I've been watching your family for years, waiting for the right opportunity. When you offered me a way into your world, I couldn't pass it up. The betrayal hit Jack like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his hand gripping the edge of the table. You've been using me. We've been using each other. Katherine's voice cracked slightly, the first sign of the emotion she'd been holding back. The difference is, I was honest about what I needed the money for. Gregory's laugh was harsh and bitter. So you're what? Some kind of avenging angel? Here to bring down the house of Harrington with your dead mother's notes? I'm here to make sure Lily gets the treatment she needs. Katherine's voice hardened again. Everything else is just justice finally catching up. Jack looked between his father and the woman he'd thought he was saving, understanding dawning like a cold sunrise. The medical bills, they're real, aren't they? Every one of them. Katherine's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I never lied about Lily. She's the only family I have left, and she's dying. But that doesn't mean I was going to pass up the chance to make her father pay for what he did to mine. Her father? Jack's voice was barely a whisper. Katherine's gaze locked on Gregory, 15 years of grief and rage crystallizing into something, sharp enough to cut diamonds. Gregory Harrington ordered my parents' deaths because my mother had evidence of his money laundering operation. Evidence that would have sent him to prison for the rest of his life. You're insane, Gregory snarled, but sweat beaded on his forehead. You can't prove any of this. Actually, I can. Katherine pulled a small recording device from her purse, its red light blinking like a heartbeat, and I just did. The room erupted into chaos. Gregory lunged for the device, but Jack was faster, his hand slamming down on his father's wrist with enough force to make the older man cry out. Don't. Jack's voice was deadly quiet. Don't make this worse than it already is. Father and son stared at each other across a chasm that had been 15 years in the making. Katherine watched the moment Jack realized that everything he'd built, everything he'd believed about his family's legacy, was founded on blood and lies. You knew, Jack said, his voice hollow with recognition. About the investigation? About what happened to her parents?
I knew.
And you let me walk into this blind? Gregory straightened his cufflinks, his composure returning like armor sliding back into place. I protected this family. I protected you. By murdering innocent people, yes. By doing what was necessary. Gregory's eyes were cold as Arctic wind. Just like I'll do what's necessary now. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Katherine felt the walls closing in around them, understanding with crystal clarity that Gregory Harrington hadn't built his empire by accepting defeat. Jack, she said quietly, her hand moving instinctively toward his arm before she caught herself. We need to leave now. But it was already too late. Through the glass walls of the conference room, Katherine could see security guards taking positions at the exits, their movements coordinated with military precision. Gregory's smile returned, cold and satisfied. I'm afraid that won't be possible. You see, my dear, when you declare war on someone like me, you'd better be prepared to fight to the death. Jack's hand found Katherine's, his fingers interlacing. With hers in a gesture that might have been protective or possessive or something else entirely. What do you want? He asked his father. Simple, Gregory replied, his voice echoing Katherine's earlier assessment with cruel irony. She gives me the evidence, all of it, and disappears forever. In exchange, the child gets her treatment, and Katherine gets to live to see another day. Katherine felt Jack's hand tighten around hers, felt the tension radiating through his body, like a live wire. She had wanted justice, had dreamed of it for 15 years. But now, faced with the choice between revenge and Lily's life, there was no choice at all. And if I refuse? Gregory's smile widened. Then you'll discover that Some accidents run in families. The blood drained from Katherine's face as the full weight of his threat settled over her. She looked at Jack, seeing her own desperation reflected in his eyes, and realized that their fake marriage had become something far more real and dangerous than either had bargained for. "I have 24 hours to decide," Gregory continued, straightening his tie as though he'd just concluded a routine business meeting. "Choose wisely. The next decision you make might be your last." The safe-house apartment smelled of dust and abandonment. Its windows covered with newspapers that filtered the morning light into sickly yellow streaks across the hardwood floor. Katherine sat on the edge of a bare mattress, her fingers tracing. The edge of a flash drive that contained 15 years of carefully guarded evidence. Jack paced the small space like a caged animal, his usually pristine appearance disheveled after their midnight escape from his office building. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie long discarded. There was a wildness in his blue eyes that Katherine had never seen before. "We can't run forever," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion and something that might have been despair. "My father has connections everywhere. Government, law enforcement, international intelligence. He'll find us, I know." Katherine's voice was steady, but her hands shook as she held the drive up to the filtered light. "That's why we're going to give him what he wants." Jack stopped pacing, his attention snapping to her with predatory focus. "You're going to destroy the evidence?" "I'm going to save Lily." Katherine met his gaze without flinching. "She's 6 years old, Jack. She doesn't deserve to die because I wanted revenge. And my father doesn't deserve to get away with murder." The words hung between them like a blade. Katherine saw the war raging behind Jack's eyes. Understood that she wasn't the only one being forced to choose between justice and survival. "There's something else," she said quietly. "Something I didn't tell you before." Jack's jaw tightened. "More lies. Not lies. Just omission." Katherine stood, moving to the newspaper-covered window. "My mother wasn't just investigating money laundering. She was investigating human trafficking. Young women from Southeast Asia brought in through shipping containers registered to Harrington Enterprises." The silence that followed was deafening. Katherine could hear Jack's breathing change, could feel the moment he understood the full scope of his father's crimes. "How many?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Dozens, maybe hundreds, over the years." Katherine turned back to him, seeing her own horror reflected in his face. The money laundering was just how they cleaned the profits. Jack's legs gave out, and he sank onto the edge of the bed beside her. For a long moment, they sat in silence, two people trying to process the magnitude of evil they were up against. "We can't let him win," Jack said finally. "We can't let Lily die. There has to be another way." Katherine looked at the man beside her, the stranger who had become her partner in desperation, and felt something crack open in her chest. In 3 days, he had become more real to her than anyone she'd known in years. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd found something genuine in the middle of the most elaborate lie she'd ever told. "Jack," she said softly, "act! What if we made the marriage real?" His head snapped up, confusion clouding his features. "What? Not the feelings?" She clarified quickly, though even as she said it, she wondered if that was entirely true. "But the legal implications. If we're actually married, I'd become part of the Harrington family. Your father can't just make me disappear without raising questions. He could make us both disappear. Not without destroying Harrington Enterprises. In the process, you're his heir, Jack. Killing you would mean admitting he doesn't have a succession plan." Jack studied her face, and Katherine felt exposed under his scrutiny, as though he could see every secret she'd ever kept. "You'd really do that? Tie yourself to this family permanently?" "For Lily." Katherine's voice broke slightly. "I do. Anything." The wedding took place in a small chapel in Queens, far from the glittering ballrooms where Gregory had planned to showcase his son's union with Helena Roswell. Katherine wore a simple white dress borrowed from the chapel's collection, while Jack stood beside her in the same suit he'd worn during their midnight escape. The ceremony was witnessed by 2 strangers pulled in from the street, their signatures scrawled hastily on documents that would bind 2 broken people together in ways neither fully understood. "Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the priest asked, his voice echoing in the nearly empty chapel. Jack's eyes met Katherine's, and for a moment she saw past all his walls to the man underneath. Scared, trapped, but determined to protect what mattered. "I do," he said, and his voice was steady. "Do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Katherine thought of Lily, thought of her parents, thought of the 15 years she'd spent planning for this moment, but mostly she thought of Jack's hand in hers, warm and solid and real. Do. The kiss that sealed their union was brief and chaste, but Katherine felt something electric pass between them, a recognition that they had crossed a line from which there could be no return. They were legally bound now, for better or worse, in a world that wanted to destroy them both. The call came 3 hours later, as they sat in a diner near the hospital where Lily was sleeping. Jack answered on the first ring, his face growing darker with each word his father spoke. "Understood," he said finally, ending the call with more force than necessary. "What did he say?" Jack's smile was grim. "Congratulations are in order. We're invited to a family dinner tomorrow night. All of us. Lily's too sick to travel." "He knows." Jack's voice was hollow. "That's the point. He wants you to choose between attending and staying with her. Either way, he wins." Katherine felt the trap closing around them like the jaws of some mechanical beast. Gregory had found their weakness and was preparing to exploit it with surgical precision. "There's something else," Jack continued, his voice dropping too barely, above a whisper. "Alina's father controls the patent on Lily's treatment protocol. If we don't show tomorrow, the supply gets cut off." The diner suddenly felt too small, too bright, too normal for the magnitude of what they were facing. Katherine stared at her reflection in the coffee cup, seeing a stranger looking back. 3 days ago, she'd been a waitress struggling to pay medical bills. Now, she was a Harrington, with all the protection and danger that name carried. "We go," she said finally. "Katherine, you don't understand what you're walking into." "Yes, I do." She looked up at him, and Jack saw something new in her forest green eyes. Not just determination, but resolve. "I understand exactly what I'm walking into. The question is, are you coming with me?" Jack reached across the table, his fingers covering hers. The gesture was meant to be comforting, but Katherine felt the tremor in his hands, the fear he was trying so hard to hide. "We're married now," he said, and there was something in his voice she couldn't quite identify. "It means we face this together." Katherine nodded, but even as she squeezed his hand in return, she was already making calculations. Tomorrow night would be a battlefield. She had learned long ago that sometimes the only way to win a war was to be willing to lose everything that mattered. She just hoped that when the smoke cleared, there would be something left worth saving. The Harrington mansion loomed against the October sky like something out of a Gothic nightmare, its windows glowing with warm light that promised comfort but delivered only shadows. Katherine stood at the entrance beside Jack, her hand steady, on his arm despite the war raging in her chest. "Last chance to run," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "I stopped running 15 years ago." The dining room was a masterpiece of intimidation, its mahogany tables stretching beneath a chandelier that could have housed a small family. Gregory sat at the head like a king holding court, while Helena occupied the chair that should have been Katherine's. The message was clear: "You are not welcome here." "How lovely," Helena said as they entered, her voice dripping with false sweetness. The happy couple arrives at last. Katherine took her seat across from Helena, noting the way the other woman's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the table. Fear, Katherine realized with surprise. Helena was afraid. "I trust Lily is comfortable in her hospital bed," Gregory said, cutting into a steak with surgical precision. "Such a shame she couldn't join us for this family celebration." "Where she needs to be?" Katherine replied evenly. "Yes, receiving very expensive treatment that could be discontinued at any moment." Gregory's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "Medicine is such a fragile thing, don't you think? One small change in supply chains, one minor administrative error, and suddenly the drugs just aren't available anymore." Jack's fork clattered against his plate. "That's enough." "Is it?" Gregory's attention shifted to his son. "Because I'm just getting started. You see, I've been thinking about our little problem, and I believe I've found a solution that benefits everyone." Katherine felt ice forming in her veins. What kind of solution? A divorce, naturally. Quick, quiet, profitable for you. Lily gets her treatment, you get a generous settlement, and Jack returns to his obligations. Everyone wins. Except for the part where you're a murderer, Katherine said quietly. The table went silent, except for the soft clink of silverware against china. Helena's hand froze halfway to her wine glass, while Gregory's eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. Careful. My dear, Gregory said, his voice silk over steel. Accusations like that can be very dangerous for one's health. Katherine leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Is that a threat, Mr. Harrington? Because I should mention that this conversation is being recorded, along with several others we've had recently. Jack's sharp intake of breath was audible in the sudden silence. Katherine hadn't told him about the recording equipment she'd been wearing since their first meeting. Hadn't mentioned the insurance policy she'd built against this exact moment. You clever little bitch, Helena breathed, her mask of sophistication. Finally slipping, Lena Gregory warned. But his daughter-in-law-elect was beyond caring about decorum. Do you have any idea what you've walked into? Helena's voice rose with each word. The Harrington family doesn't just control shipping. We control senators, judges, police commissioners. We own people like you. Helena, stop talking, Gregory commanded. But the damage was already done. Katherine smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Jack had ever seen. Please, continue. I'm recording every word. Gregory's face went white with rage. In one fluid motion, he swept his arm across the table, sending crystal glasses and china plates crashing to the floor. The sound was deafening in the cavernous dining room, like the world itself, breaking apart. Enough, he roared. You want to play games with evidence? Fine. But understand this, little girl. The moment you make any of this public, Lily's treatment stops, not just the medicine. The doctors, the hospital, even the janitor who cleans her room. I own them all. Katherine felt the trap snap shut around her like steel jaws. She had played her hand too early, revealed her cards before securing Lily's safety. The recording device in her purse suddenly felt like a lead weight. However, Gregory continued, his voice returning to its cultured calm, I'm not an unreasonable man. There's another option. What option? Jack demanded, his hand finding Katherine's under the table. Gregory's smile was the expression of a shark circling wounded prey. Katherine gives me the evidence, all of it, and agrees to a very public, very messy divorce that makes her look like a gold-digging opportunist. In exchange, Lily gets her treatment, and Katherine gets to live with the knowledge that her greed destroyed any chance of justice for her parents. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Katherine would have to destroy her own reputation, paint herself as the villain in their story, and watch her parents' killers go free. But Lily would live. You bastard, Jack said, starting to rise from his chair. Sit down, son. Gregory's voice cracked like a whip. This doesn't concern you anymore. Like hell it doesn't. She's my wife. A marriage that won't survive the week. Once the media gets hold of the story I'm prepared to tell, Katherine felt the weight of 15 years pressing down on her shoulders. Her parents' voices seemed to whisper from the shadows, asking her to choose between justice for them and life for the child who had become her world. She thought of Lily's laugh. Bright and pure, despite everything they'd endured, she thought. Of tiny hands reaching for her in the hospital bed, trusting her to make everything better. She thought of a future where Lily grew up healthy and strong, never knowing the price that had been paid for her life. I'll do it, Katherine said quietly. No. Jack's voice was sharp with panic. Katherine, you can't. There has to be another way. She turned to look at him, this man who had become so much more than a convenient arrangement. In his eyes, she saw something that made her chest ache with possibility and regret. There is no other way, she said softly, and you know it. Gregory clapped slowly, the sound echoing like gunshots in the silent room. How touching, young love, defeated by reality. Helena, perhaps you'd like to congratulate the happy couple on their impending divorce? But Helena wasn't listening. Her face had gone pale as she stared at something over Gregory's shoulder. Dossed out following her gaze, Katherine saw them. Federal agents. Moving through the mansion with the coordinated precision of a military operation, Gregory Harrington, the lead agent, announced, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade, "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, money laundering, and human trafficking." Gregory's composure finally cracked completely. "This is impossible. I own half the bureau. The other half sends their regards," the agent replied. Producing handcuffs with practiced efficiency, Katherine felt the world tilt on its axis as the pieces fell into place. She looked at Jack, seeing guilt and determination warring across his features. "You knew," she breathed. "You knew this was going to happen." Jack's throat worked as he swallowed hard. "I've been feeding information to the FBI for 2 years. Ever. Since I found evidence of the trafficking operation in the company files, but the recording, the evidence I had, was the final piece they needed." Jack's voice was barely audible over the chaos of Gregory being arrested. "I'm sorry, Katherine, I couldn't tell you. If you'd known, you might have warned him somehow, and we couldn't risk it." The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. She had thought they were partners, in desperation, allies against a common enemy. But Jack had been playing a longer game all along, using her just as surely as she had been using him. "You let me think I was choosing between justice and Lily's life," she said, her voice hollow with realization. "You let me agonize over that choice when you knew your father was going to be arrested anyway? Here for Lily and not revenge." Jack's eyes were pleading now. "If I'd told you the truth, would you have gone through with the marriage?" Katherine thought about it, really thought about it. The answer surprised her. "Yes," she said quietly, "but not for the same reasons." Jack's breath caught. "Katherine." "The treatment protocols," she continued, her voice stronger now. "The ones Helena's father controls. What happens to them now?" Helena laughed bitterly from across the table as federal agents secured the scene around them. "They're public domain as of this morning. Daddy's company was seized as part of the investigation. Seems he was Gregory's business partner in more ways than one." Katherine felt something tight in her chest finally loosen. Lily would live. Whatever else happened, whatever lies had been told or truths revealed, her daughter would survive. "So what now?" she asked Jack, her voice barely audible over the commotion. Jack stood slowly, his movements careful as though he were made of something fragile. "Now, you get your divorce. I spend the rest of my life trying to clean up the mess of my family." "Maid, what if I don't want a divorce?" The words surprised them both. Jack turned to stare at her, searching her face for some sign that she was joking or lying or playing another angle. "Why?" he asked simply. Katherine stood as well, closing the distance between them until she could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes. "Because somewhere in the middle of all this deception, I stopped pretending to care about you." Jack's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "Even knowing what I am." "What, my family? Is you're not your father, Jack? You proved that tonight. And you're not the woman I thought I was saving." Katherine smiled, and for the first time in 15 years, it reached her eyes. "No, I'm the woman who saved you right back." Laugh was shaky with relief and something that might have been love. "So what do we do now, Mrs. Harrington?" "We go see our daughter," Katherine said, the words feeling right in a way that surprised her. "And then we figure out how to build something real from all this beautiful wreckage." As they walked past the chaos of Gregory's arrest, past Helena's, bitter protests and the agents cataloging evidence, Katherine felt the ghosts of her parents finally settling into peace. Justice had come at last, not through her carefully planned revenge, but through the courage of a man who had chosen to destroy his own world rather than let evil flourish. Outside, the October night was crisp with possibility. Jack's hand found hers as they walked toward his car, their fingers intertwining with the natural ease of two people who had found each other in the darkness. "Katherine," Jack said as they reached the car. "Yes."
Thank you.
Katherine squeezed his hand, thinking of Lily sleeping peacefully in her hospital bed, finally free from the shadow of unpayable bills and uncertain futures. "Thank you for making sure I never had to choose between love and justice." As they drove through the sleeping city toward the hospital where their real life was waiting to begin, Katherine realized that sometimes the best contracts were the ones written not in ink, but in trust, in sacrifice, and in the fierce determination to protect what matters most. Behind them, the Harrington mansion grew smaller in the rearview mirror, its lights dimming until it was nothing more than a memory of the people they used to be. Asterisk, asterisk. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more emotional stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Comment below, would you enter a fake marriage? To save someone you love. The end.